Hello again, and welcome to today's episode. I have a question. Did you realize that you have hidden powers? They are with you all the time, controlling all the functions and conditions of your physical body. And it has been proven to be so, time after time. Then perhaps it is better, before we go any further, to re-examine the 7 propositions of the working hypotheses at this point, as M. Germain has also suggested. 1. Superconscious is constantly amenable to control by the power of suggestion. 2. The superconscious is incapable of independent reasoning by the process of induction. 3. The power of the superconscious to reason deductively from given premises to correct conclusions is practically perfect. 4. The superconscious is endowed with a perfect memory. 5. The superconscious has absolute control of the functions and conditions of the body. 6. The superconscious has the power to communicate by means other than the recognized channels of the 5 senses. 7. The superconscious is capable of intuition and perception of the laws of nature. The question that normally should now arise in one's mind, and it undoubtedly has, is what am I to do with the power that is within me? Indeed, what are you going to do with this gift is, of course, only up to you. You can use it for the greatest benefit to yourself and the mankind. You can allow it to be unused and wasted away. But you can make use of the hidden powers. You must now learn how it can be aroused at will, under certain requisite conditions, for many purposes, including the alleviation of human suffering and misery. However, there are many skeptics who have long taken a negative attitude towards the belief in mental therapy. Now, M. Germain speaks of one of his experiences dealing with a skeptic like this who did not believe in such things. As he explains, it was a mistaken belief, such as that being expressed that permits many petitions of sincere pilgrims to holy places to go unanswered. But Germain insisted, it is my own belief that the faith of the conscious mind has nothing more to do with the requisite mental attitude beyond consciously submitting thoughts to the superconscious level in accordance with a great law of suggestion that underlies all human relationships. Continuing, he says, the faith required for therapeutic purposes is purely the subjective faith. It is only attainable upon the cessation of active opposition on the part of the conscious mind. This is the faith required by men to the great resources of the accumulated intelligence of mankind that is stored in the superconscious. Obviously, he tried to explain to this person that subjective faith is the key to the hidden power. Subjective faith is much the same as superstition, said the other person, and is when it was the emotional force that induced the magic of ancient days. This man felt forced to agree that he had been the victim of mistaken thinking. It was not many months that Mr. Germain had received a letter from this person, telling him that by using subjective faith, he had succeeded in helping his wife overcome lengthy and painful illness that made life very miserable for many years. Under the mental therapy, the perfect passivity of the patient is, in necessity, as the first essential condition. It is therefore desirable to gain concurrent faith, both on the conscious and superconscious levels. This is the type of attitude attained by those who induce therapeutic cures through prayer. But it is not absolutely necessary if the patient is in good faith, makes the necessary autosuggestions. It can be done consciously, in words, or by submitting to the suggestions of a therapist. There are many examples of suggestion through hypnosis. You may have heard of them, or studied, or knowledgeable of, or not. No matter what and how the system of mental healing is utilized, the conditions are just the same. The whole science, therefore, of healing can be summarized into a couple of words: passivity and suggestion. The primary requisite is passivity and receptivity on the part of the patient. Meaning, simply it is the suspension of the functions of the conscious level of the mind, just for a little while. This can only allow the superconscious level of the mind to receive the impressions directed by suggestion and doing something with them. Ideally, the state of profound hypnosis is generally considered the most favorable condition for reception of suggestions. Whenever, by passivity, the patient becomes subjectively receptive to the corrective suggestions, he is at least partially induced into a hypnotic state. But often, the patient needs be fully hypnotized. The therapist can place himself in a similar hypnotic state. The result of the suggestions, according to Germain, upon the patient will be all the more effective. The suggestions to the superconscious level of the patient's mind are conveyed telepathically from the superconscious level of the therapist's mind. If both the patient and the therapist are in a partially hypnotic state, they are en rapport. On the subconscious, or rather superconscious level, the superconscious of the therapist, having been given direction in advance, can then convey correct suggestions to the patient's superconscious. The superconscious level of the patient's mind, being controlled by such suggestion, exercises complete control of the functions and conditions of the body to restore a normal state of health. However, it is not necessary that either the patient or the therapist become even partially hypnotized. If the requisite element of faith or confidence, if you like, has been established in the superconscious level of the patient's mind, the hypnotic state becomes not necessary, but a concurrence of both objective and subjective faith is required in such cases to produce effective results. Now, some mental therapists consider that faith on the part of the patient is not as an essential prerequisite to successful healing. But some may choose not to believe that. However, a close observer will see that the statement is made primarily for the purpose of inspiring faith subjectively in the doubting patient. For instance, a prospective patient approaches the therapist with an expressed lack of faith. He may be saying, "I understand that it is necessary that your patients have faith before they can be healed. If that is the case, I cannot be helped by mental treatment because I am hopelessly skeptical." Therapist may reply, "Faith is not necessary in my method. I do not care what you believe. I can help you nonetheless." This is satisfactory to our prospective patient if this patient submits himself or herself for the treatment. Then he or she has all the faith essential for a successful cure, that is, subjective faith. And the patient is undoubtedly quite unaware of this expression of faith. Although this may be considered as a trick of the trade by some therapists, but it gives the patient the required faith or trust and accomplishes the therapy without any great struggle. Some therapists will not use such a method. Jesus, for example, refused to use any falsehood, even if the end seemed to justify the means. He always told his followers very frankly that faith was essential. The words of Jesus are as true today as they were then, when he proclaimed to mankind the secret power in a single word that epitomizes the entire science of psychotherapy: faith. Here we can see the efficacy of his admonition. What things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them, according to Mark chapter 11, verse 24. The success of psychotherapy depending, as it does, upon the mental attitude of the patient, might not be lasting if the corrective suggestions do not remain dominant in the patient. Superconscious, well, the cure may not be permanent. Patient may be so elated with the success of the treatment that he talks about it to an acquaintance who may be skeptical. The result is that his confidence is weakened by his friend's expression of incredulity or doubt. The patient's enthusiasm may easily be shattered by a storm of ridicule. The superconscious level of the patient's mind, ever amenable to control by the power of suggestion, is adversely influenced by his associate's unfavorable attitude without being consciously aware of it. The patient loses faith. Now you see what kind of faith we are talking about. In this case, if the ailment has had a mental origin, the patient may even suffer a far more severe and serious attack than he did originally. Christ seemed fully aware of this danger. It is written that when he healed a person in private, he usually joined him. Thou tell no man. The very example of the skepticism of friends or relatives undo the work of the great gift is proof that the superconscious is constantly amenable to control by the power of suggestion. This is especially so when the individual is not aware that his mind is being influenced by the attitudes of others. How careful you have to be in guarding against negative ideas, where they are expressed by others or originate in your own mind. This is why your daily fourth checkup against negative thinking is the most important. Say the final 15 minutes of every day are the moments that are going to plant the seeds of thought for your superconscious to consider through your sleeping hours. If you think constructively, if you think positive thoughts just before falling asleep at night, there is less possibility that the superconscious level of the mind will be disturbed. But dwelling on some of the disagreeable happenings of the day, do not fail to make your fourth check the point of the day. Before we go any further, I would suggest to go back to the last program and consider the process of checking against negative thoughts so that it is well absorbed by the conscious and will become a routine controlled by your own superconscious. You have seen the results of suggestion in hypnotic sleep. Remember, natural sleep is no different from hypnotic sleep. The thoughts you plant in the mind before falling asleep are the thoughts upon which the mind will dwell. The suggestions you planted are the suggestions the mind will carry out. Results of hypnotic suggestion are, in a word, amazing. This is because the more perfectly objective intelligence can be held in abeyance, the more effectively the superconscious can perform its functions of directing the bodily organs in physical normality. The superconscious level of the mind is as amenable to control by suggestion during natural sleep as it is during the induced or hypnotic sleep. Therefore, the most favorable condition for the transference of therapeutic suggestion from the therapist to the patient is when both are in a state of natural sleep, if it can at all happen. Little need to be said here regarding the mode of operation. The method is as effective as it is simple. All that is required on the part of the therapist is that he shall be possessed of an earnest desire to cure the patient, and that he shall concentrate his mind just before going to sleep. Open the task in hand and direct his superconscious to occupy itself during the night in conveying therapeutic suggestions to the patient. The communication between the superconscious levels of the therapists and the patient's mind is achieved by mental telegraphy. In other words, telepathy. Recall now what Dr. Carell said about the phenomenon of miraculous healing. There is no need for the patient himself to pray or even to have any religious faith. It is sufficient that someone around him be in a state of prayer. To the therapist, he must accustom himself to the assumption that his superconscious is like a distinct entity. It must be treated as though it were separate and apart from the conscious level of the mind, and therefore it has to be guided and directed in the work to be done. You know that no part of the human organism functions as a separate unit. However, for the purposes of autosuggestion, it is desirable to look upon your superconscious as a willing servant, which will carry out the wishes and directions of its master, your conscious mind. The work is possibly more effective if the therapist knows the particular ailment with which the patient is affected. He will then be able to give directions more specifically, but this may be left to the natural instinct and latent wisdom of the superconscious. Everyone possesses the power to alleviate human suffering to a greater or lesser degree by this unique method. It is not a means by which money can be earned, but it has compensation far more valuable than money. Aside from the pure satisfaction of doing good, there is a practical reward in every effort to heal the sick by this method. Every sincere effort to convey therapeutic impressions to the patient during sleep is inevitably followed by a dreamless sleep on the part of the therapist as well. This means that the superconscious is free from the usual conflicts of mind that usually cast their reflections across the threshold of consciousness in the form of dreams. It would seem that these superconscious, following the suggestions of the therapist, occupies itself so completely with the work. It is directed to do that. It has little time to indulge in the emotional conflicts that ordinarily worry the human nervous system while one sleeps. The physical environment of the sleeper, therefore, fails to produce impressions strong enough to cause the dreams that ordinarily result from the mental impressions of the happenings of the day. Thus, the therapeutic suggestions impart during sleep react favorably upon the therapist, and his own health is promoted by the very act that helps the health of the patient. Dr. Carell said, "The patient who is cured is not praying for himself, but for another." This constructive attitude is conducive to greater acceleration of the processes of organic repair, and therefore beneficial to the therapist. You have been shown how to, and that the superconscious level of the mind is constantly influenced by the suggestions of the individual's conscious level of the mind. This is the normal relation between the two segments of the mind. Objective control is exercised unconsciously. That is to say, you are not aware of the interactive processes of the two levels of the mind, the feeling level and the reasoning level, explained on the program of the brain power. Once you recognize this, you have not only arrived at the principle that lies at the root of the true psychological science, but you are then prepared to accept the primary proposition, which underlies the science of mental therapy, which controls by suggestion the operation of his own superconscious, even though the suggestion be in direct contradiction to his own objective belief. And so, this is unqualifiedly true, even though suggestion may be contrary to reason, experience, or the evidence of the senses. If such drastic results can be produced when opposed by the strongest instinct of man's own nature, the instincts for survival, how much easier must it be to produce equally amazing results when operating constructively in harmony with these instincts? That is, along the lines of least resistance. It must be quite evident now to you that autosuggestion can be employed to great advantage for therapeutic purposes. Indeed, the power of self-help is the most important part of mental therapy. Without this power, psychotherapy is of comparatively little value or benefit to anyone. And it goes this way: the power to resist disease, to prevent sickness, as well as to cure it. The old axiom that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure holds just as good in psychotherapy as it did in organic remedies. If you can attain the power to hold yourself in the mental attitude that will enable you to resist the encroachments of disease, you have mastered the great secret of psychosomatic medicine. This is the hidden power that is yours to use. Now, we shall end this program here until we meet again by the next episode. Until then, keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.